Hello, Tom, and thank you so much for joining the SaaS Playbook today. I just wanted to give everybody a brief introduction to Tom. He is the founder of Kirkham IronTech, and he's been in business for decades and decades. And I think from this podcast alone, I'm definitely going to learn a few things. Grab a pen and paper because I think you're going to learn a few things from Tom as well. And we're very lucky to have him here today and share some insights, some knowledge and experience with what he's building and what he's built in the past. So, Tom, you've been a business owner for decades. What were the pivotal moments that shaped how you lead and build today?
That's a great question. I had about 12 years ago, I had gone through a couple of cancer scares and some surgeries and a spinal infection. And my wife had MS, and she ended up passing away. It was the bad form of MS. There's about 5% of people that get MS. There's nothing that can be done, and they usually don't last but a couple of years. And it really changed the way I was thinking. And a friend of mine he had joined to be a salesman for us. But during that period of time where I'm doing nothing but either caregiving or going to the hospital for tests and infusions and all these other things that I had, surgeries and all this that I had to do, he took over as president of the company. And so after it all wound down, it gave me a lot of free time to think about what do I want to do? The company is being run by somebody else, and I knew I wanted to stay involved, but only for the right reasons. I didn't have to have the company. I could have sold it or anything like that. And so I started really thinking about it. And I'd been practicing stoicism, and I was a kind of a philosophy minor in college. And so I just started traveling, and it gave me a lot of free time to really think about things. And I realized I want the company to be meaningful and for the employees. So we instituted things like servant leadership, stakeholder capitalism. That's part of our mission. That's built into our culture. And I really worked hard on making sure that this was a company that people wanted to work at. And then up until that time, I treated it as just a profit center, and you got to make money. Of course, keep your customers happy. And it's not like we treated people bad anyway. But when you change your way of thinking to really effort it, especially if you adopt the concept of servant leadership, you start seeing a structural change. You know, Peter Drucker, my favorite Peter Drucker saying is, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So what does that mean? Well, what it means to me is you can develop all the SOPs and procedures and policy and governance that, I know I got a friend that's just, oh, we need a policy for that. And he writes a book. And that's all well and good. But what about those times where you don't have a policy to cover a certain scenario? And that's where culture comes in. So we empower our people to, if they've got to make a split second decision, and believe me, in this industry, it happens a lot. If they make the wrong decision, they're not going to be penalized at all because they tried to do something rather than doing nothing. And we support each other that way. And it's top to bottom. Everybody does that. Everybody adopts that mindset. And, it's really amazing to really walk in and just see people helping other people learn new things and getting over bumps and stuff.
I think that's really valuable. And over the course of this podcast series, you're actually not the first person to say that culture actually trumps a lot of strategy and SOP and sort of normal business structure. And I think that really attests and draws to the fact of your experience because you would have gone through the business waves. And I think you would agree at some point you probably did think that strategy and SOPs would trump culture. But the thing, in my opinion, about culture is and it's exactly what you said earlier, is it will always facilitate things that SOPs cannot, physically and mentally and spiritually. And I think it's more to the fact of, you said that you walk into the business and you can see people or your team members helping each other out, right? And that's a very rare and seldom culture, perspective, or environment that people can walk into and gladly say that as well. So I think that's something that we should commend. And yes, like you said, revenue is great, building's great, tools are great, all the shiny things are great. But at the end of the day, it comes down to the humans and what the humans outcomes of treating those humans correctly. And I think that kind of draws on the fact of the whole point of this podcast is, and I think I mentioned earlier in our previous conversation, is we are so focused on running our own path that we forget to have these conversations with other founders and, even peers or, whatever the situation is. But I think having the connection first, everything else follows.
Yeah. And we walk the talk. It's, when we talk about stakeholder capitalism, that's all the stakeholders, our community, our employees, our clients, our vendors. When we enter a relationship with a new vendor, we use a lot of SaaS vendors, especially if they're younger type companies. When we, enter into that, we want to be careful that we are using their product the best way with the best training and purpose and intent, because if it doesn't work out with that product or that software that they're offering, we don't want it to be our fault, right? We gave it an honest effort and it just doesn't work out and we have to switch, then that just makes us feel better. It's because I see so often a lot of businesses will cut spending on training. All our people are smart enough to teach themselves. Well, I got a lot of smart people and training has never failed us yet. So
I do have to say, I just want to touch on that point you just made just now. And I've actually had personal experience where we've partnered with other businesses and they what I like to call penny pinch, right? So they're always watching the bottom dollar. They're always watching what they can save. And I like to challenge it. I'm not sure if I'm the only one, but when I look at things from a macro perspective, I look at instead of trying to save money, how can we make more revenue so that we can commercialize it and therefore don't have to reduce the level of training or reduce the level of care it takes to look after the humans that actually are aligning with your vision, right? So that's just something I quickly wanted to add in there, and I'm not too sure if you agree or disagree, but I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
well, it's one of our three pillars of what we call our IronTech framework. You, you know, what we do is managed services provider or managed security services provider. And there's three pillars there. Number one is IT. We want to make a return on investment. We know what the benchmarks are for most of our clients, their industry. A lot of them are professional service firms like accounting, finance, law. And we know that they should be spending around $6,000 per person per year on IT and cybersecurity, all of it. And if I walk into a place and they say, well, we only spend 4% of our gross revenues or $3,000 a year on all of those things, I already know they've got gaps and they're not maximizing their return on investment. Accounting firms are notorious for using laptops that are 6 and 7 years old just to squeak another $50 of value out of a $1,000 laptop, not realizing the impact on the productivity. And so we educate our clients on that IT is an investment, okay? And if you're way underspending, you're not getting that return on investment. Like you said, it positively affect that's why you buy IT. That's why there's computers. It's to improve return on investment. And so we help educate people on that. And of course, most of our clients already get that. So then it's just about turning the dials a little bit here and there and getting it really dialed in. And then the other pillar is security, because if you have a security event, it could be fatal. So we've got best breed tools, our own framework, and everything is around security. And then finally, it's governance. And this is where you get into aligning business objectives with IT and security and understanding risk, getting that ROI on the IT investment and everything else around the policies and procedures. And those are the three pillars of our framework. And that's how we approach it. And it's really nice. It's really nice. Our company is set up in such a way that the fewer problems our clients have, the more money both of us makes. So we're on the same team.
That's a very unique model, I think. I think I would confidently say that more and more businesses are shifting towards a model similar to yours. But I think in a weird way, we're going to have to, in terms of longevity of your relationship or retention of that relationship, partner to partner, business to business, I think you have to for longevity. Otherwise, I just don't really see it lasting very long. It's going to be super superficial. Uh, but I did have a question for you in regards to inbound versus outbound. Now, you've intentionally shifted away from outbound towards inbound and mindshare. What was the moment where you realized that that was the right long-term play?
Well, this isn't the first time we've made that switch. I think some of it was structural. It's like Steve Miller's a good friend of mine, but he's a marketing guru, and he wrote Uncopyable. It's an Amazon bestseller, and a few other books. He's got these 4 M's, and I'm missing one of them right at the moment. But basically, it boils down to media, message, and moment. And what that means is you've got to have the right message to connect with prospects. And so we talk about ROI and security. So that's a good message. And then how are you going to do the media? How are you going to get it out? So we do a lot of social media. We do a lot of LinkedIn, which I guess it could be argued that that's outbound. But the messaging around how we do things is what we send out in direct mail and things like that. But moment is the critical part because clients are sticky in our business. It is painful to switch service providers. And so generally speaking, a prospect has to be encountering serious pain in order for us to get that account. And so by us letting them come to us when it's the right moment, we find is much more efficient from a marketing perspective. And then we do all of the other stuff with, establishing thought leadership and all of those other things that, okay, you're not ready today, but when you are, we're pretty good, you know. And it's not dialing for dollars. But what we did this year is we had sales and marketing put together. So what we did is we broke out sales and added client experience to that. So it makes them more account manager focused, right? It keeps that churn down, keeps that relationship really tight. And some of the people on the sales side are still doing the drop in, hey, introduce myself, or the make the phone calls and all of that. But it's not a big part of the business. We're really concentrated on inbound, and we're simply there when you're ready. Now, is that expensive? Yeah. But over time, it's actually more, I think it's more bang for the buck on both sales and marketing budgets.
I would agree. I think on that front, I think your LTV in terms of lifetime value of that client would sort of pay off for it in the long term. But you did mention there in an industry where switching providers is rare unless something goes wrong. How do you create urgency without relying on fear-based selling?
Well, we have a saying that it's, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt. Well, for us, it's facts and understanding. And another guy in the company, he brought that into the company. I can't remember what the D is, but yeah, I should know, but I can't think of it right now. It's on our website. But that's part of what we're doing is, there's a fine line between trying to scaring the bejesus out of somebody to really getting the point across that security is a real thing. It's not just the big guys that get hacked, the ones you hear on CNN or New York Times or whatever. The fact is small businesses are the ones that get hacked more often. And so, especially when I do these continuing education classes for attorneys, invariably, because part of my deal is to stress how many hackers there are in the world and how big of an industry it is, invariably somebody accuses me of that. You're just trying to scare us because you sell the solution. And I go, look, if you really want to be scared, go pick up Nicole Perlroth's book titled This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends. I'm just barely scratching the surface. If anything, I'm understating how serious the threat is.
Mm,
And that usually quiets everything down. But so, yeah, it is fear selling, but most people have no idea how big the hacking industry is.
mm,
So we've got to do some of that. But
mm.
we do have the solution, and you can get it from a lot of other service providers. We just do it the best way. It's real. If you're a client of ours, you are going to put in these security things, and we're going to monitor them and mitigate and remediate and all of these things, or else you won't be a client. That's how serious we are about it. So you're going
Mm.
to buy an EDR, you're going to get security awareness training. That's a culture thing. And the other things that it's not negotiable. I mean, that's it. And if you can't see that value to your company, then we're probably not a good fit anyway, you
Yeah,
know?
yeah, yeah.
So
I think what you mentioned there, the drawback, well, the biggest component is actually education. And education often comes without any return, really. But and the reason why I mentioned that is because within the AI space in Australia, we are quite behind the United States. And that's just a fact. The numbers there will show you. But is that due to reluctancy or is that due to undereducation? And I think the people that I've had conversations with within the Australian market, they just have absolutely no idea in terms of safety, what is available to them, how do they put safeguards in place, and it's kind of quite an untouched industry. And the reason I say that is because there is AI everywhere. It's a buzzword right now. But how do you, instead of ignoring it and fighting it, how do you adopt it and remain safe? I think it is something that people need to be educated about.
yeah, we one of our policies, because privacy goes hand in hand with security, one of our policies is we don't tell the public who any of our particular clients are. We don't name them, right? Because
Correct.
that weakens their security, it weakens our security. Well, that's just another attack vector. If they're trying to get into this law firm that specializes in patent law or intellectual property law, we got to worry about the Chinese not only hacking into them, but also into us, right? So, but now with AI, these phishing emails can be highly, highly tailored at scale. So they can send out 1 million phishing emails that is targeted individually to each particular victim. Now that's a game changer. That's because in the past, the companies that were targeted took human time, money, and energy to, like, because we've been targeted for years. They would look at our LinkedIn, understand our organization chart and other things about us, and they would use that against us. But it's expensive for a hacker to do that. They'd rather just get a list of 100,000 emails, blast it out, and just use normal psychological manipulation techniques to get somebody to click on a link to let them into the network, right?
Uh-huh.
Well, now you're getting what appears to be an email from your direct report boss. And so it's much easier to get fooled. In the days of bad grammar and bad graphics, and, people think they won't be fooled, you're wrong. I don't care who you are. You are absolutely wrong. We simulate phishing emails in our company, and there's only been one person in the history of the company that hasn't that has had 100% non being fooled, or 100% success rate, right? It ain't me. Okay. And
It
I've
takes a lot
wrote,
to admit that, Tom.
I have written, well, I just want to stress that I don't care how smart you think you are. Weird things can happen in coincidences and things like that. And I clicked on a link, and the next thing I'm getting is a 2-minute training video telling me everything I did wrong. And it's things I know. And because of a coincidence, I fell for it. All my training went out the window. And so the deal with training, because I want to back up a minute. You mentioned this early in your what you were talking about. We know for a fact, if a company implements continuous cybersecurity awareness training and simulated phishing attacks, they cut their risk of being breached in half. That's it. That one thing cuts it in half. And security awareness training is not very expensive, nor is it very time consuming. And what we find is once they get into it and they really adopt it, they find it's useful in their employees' personal lives as well. You know,
Mm,
we have videos that show people on how to detect a potential gas pump skimmer, that skims the credit cards.
mhm,
That's not directly related to the company. It makes them safer in their personal life, which means you've got less stress there. So they're
mhm,
not personally getting breached. But yeah, just that one thing just cuts the risk in half. And then you add layers and layers and layers to really try to you want to drive that you can't get 100%
mm.
bulletproof. If the NSA can be breached, anyone can be breached.
Yeah.
But what we want to do is this is where the risk analysis part comes in when we're working with management. We want to drive that risk from say any given year a 5 to 10% chance of being breached. We're going to drive that down to 0.1, 0.01% chance.
Mm,
And that's what our Iron Tech framework, part of our Iron Tech framework is, and then use best practices, best of breed tools and techniques,
mm.
and all the other stuff that goes with that.
I mean, cybersecurity is one of those things is it's probably not top of mind as it probably should be, but you don't know the real pains and the real struggles until you've been breached. And by that point, it's probably a little too late, or you'll have to completely do a revamp and reinstall and restart, rehaul your whole entire network and hardware, right? And that's unfortunate, but that's how unfortunately some people and some business owners need to learn, unfortunately. But I hope it doesn't have to work out that way for some people.
Yeah, you mentioned something earlier I want to go back to is how do we get clients? How do we get a client to switch their service provider? And frequently it comes down to security. They've either been on a webinar of mine or a podcast like this and they hear me talking about it and they're going, why is our IT service provider not telling us this?
Mm,
Why are we using consumer grade internet protection suite that you can buy at Office Depot or Best Buy or whatever? And so that's one of the ways we get in. And this is no secret in the industry. I didn't invent this, but that is one of the ways they get in there. Believe it or not, there's still IT service providers that kind of treat it as an add-on.
mm,
Cybersecurity, increased defense. Well, that's the wrong way to think about it. You
mm,
really should be starting with security first, and then you plug back in IT, right? Security above all else. We understand that there's going to be a productivity hit to
mm,
implement most of the things around security. But, and we balance that a lot, but you've really got to think about security first and then IT.
mm, mm,
And that creates an opportunity for us to have a discussion because we're giving them some insights that no one's exposed them to before.
mm. I think that's basically a tip of the hat to your level of experience as well. I mean, anybody who's new to the market will not have that level of insight or at least a different perspective. They're just going to have generalized data or generalized opinions and perspectives going in try to talk to these clients and or they kind of get complacent, unfortunately. I just wanted to sort of refocus on the AI piece a little bit because we did mention it briefly before, but you're planning to take AI across the entire organization if you haven't already done so. But cybersecurity and client confidentiality are non negotiables. Where do you see the biggest operational friction right now?
Yeah, well, it's ops, right? It's the support desk and it's everything but sales and marketing. Now, we've been using AI in sales and marketing for 2 or 3 years now. But we've been using AI in our security defenses for years, so because it's just a superior way to detect intrusions and mitigate them and all that. But since we have such a focus on client privacy, our firewall is once they become a client and no AI because we've got to be certain that the data we're feeding into whatever AI it is going to remain private. And with all of these public ones that are out there, Chat GPT and all of them, there's some real problems around. Are you the product, or are they using the private data to train. And so I feel, and I wrote a research paper about this for Leader to Leader magazine that was published sometime this year. And we've got to have a private AI. Now, I don't really care if it's on our own stuff, if it's in our own cloud where it's super secure. Doesn't have to be, but we can do it that way as well. And then we're going to be able to uncover hidden information to help us better serve clients because we can go in and mine support tickets and, investigations that we've done to get more data to better serve our customers. Our feedback scores are, great, but what are they really experiencing? Are they having a good support experience? So we can get that sentiment out of those support tickets and phone calls and things with AI that we couldn't do in the past. And it just makes us serve our clients better,
Mm.
if we can get in there. And that's just an example of all the different ways. We can see trends with certain operating systems or certain vertical market applications like dentistry software and law software. We can see trends and all of that to help us solve problems much quicker. So, but that's what our initiative is for next year.
Mm.
So if there's anybody listening that's got a very private AI, feel free to reach out to me and because I'm going to be working hard on it in the first quarter.
Yeah. Yeah. Appreciate that. Anybody listening, Tom's details are below, so you know where to find him. So you don't have to click anywhere else. It will be right down below this video. On the topic of AI, as AI accelerates faster than any regulation or education, what concerns you most about how businesses are implementing it today?
Well, the security is a problem for me. You've got to be conscious of how you're using these incredible tools that I think personally are a benefit to society. Yeah, AI is a scary world, but when you really get into it and you realize that it's not replacing you, it's helping you get to be better at what you do, right? You're way too young to remember this, but whenever I was a kid, I was in junior high school and calculators had just come out. And that was a big thing. No calculators in school. And I'm going, it helps me do the math. I need math as a skill in my adult life. And I'm just using another tool to make me better at math.
Mm-hmm.
So why are you banning it?
Mm.
I agree. You need to teach preschoolers and elementary kids how to add manually. But when it comes to applying that, there's a difference. I don't need to be an expert at math if I have a calculator. And if we treat these things like the internet was a seminal event in human history, the creation and invention of both the internet and the World Wide Web, which are really two separate things, and of course, email, and now we've got Bitcoin and blockchain technology, and of course, the latest seminal event in human history is this prevalence of AI tools. And progress is not going to stop. And they all have pros and cons. There's bad that comes along. We pay a high price in modern society with cancer deaths because we're petroleum based. But I don't think anybody would argue that we're worse off overall because of gasoline and other petroleum products. Yeah, it's tragic about the microplastics and the pollution and all of those other things. But, you know, when horses were the main mode, it wasn't very pleasant in cities either, you know? So, so you can't stop progress. So just understand it and how it's going to impact everybody around you and your company and your life, and then treat it as a tool. It's not a be all end all. I treat my laptops as tools. This big monitor is a tool, and that I think that a lot of people lose sight of that. I've heard people complain about they don't use AI because it eats up too much electricity. It impacts the environment. Well, okay. Well, I heard that with Bitcoin. I've heard it with computers and data centers, and they're not going away. We just adapt and overcome. Yeah.
I think the most important part of that message that you just mentioned was always remembering that AI is tools, not to replace human intelligence, decisions, business functions. They're just tools. And like you said, people lose sight of that extremely quickly. And it's unfortunate, but I actually think, even myself, I need to use that as a reminder. And I'll save this little clip, Tom, and then I'll come back to it. And I'm like, oh, that's what Tom was talking about.
Yeah, just this morning I was listening to CNBC. It's a business channel, and they were talking about this scene from Mad Men. The advertising series about it, the '60s in on Madison Avenue in New York, the advertising business. And there was a scene where they had this whole office pool of typists. There's typewriters on every desk, and they're just banging away on a typewriter. And nowadays, I don't even remember the last time I saw a typewriter.
I
And
haven't seen one in my life.
computers, yeah, so all of these typists, it's so tragic they lost their jobs. Well, no, you got to be a good typist to use a computer. And, the computer just made them more efficient. And we adapt. Their stagecoach builders are no longer around, right?
Mhm.
And society adapts. And that's just the way we all move forward. But we get to use these wonderful tools, sometimes
Mm,
for bad, sometimes for good.
mm,
I'm kind of an anti-social media person. I don't
mhm.
I don't really do anything on it. So, in fact, I got mad at myself this morning because I was scrolling through Facebook while a friend of mine was telling me he's posting this thing. I look at Facebook maybe twice a year, and there's so much misinformation and manipulation going on a lot of these social media channels that I understand it's a way to keep in touch with your kids and your parents and your friends. But just remember, they make more money the longer they keep you engaged or enraged. And then they are selling your data to people that use it against you in many, many cases.
Mm,
So, which gets into a privacy problem that I have. So,
I think that's a whole different podcast in itself, Tom. But I do have one last question for you, Tom. For founders and operators navigating AI, growth and security all at once, what's one principle you rely on to stay grounded and make good decisions?
wow. That's a good question. How do I stay grounded is basically what you're asking me. I don't know. I think servant leadership's really is a part of that. Am I really serving, the employees and the clients and the vendors and our community? Um, because I mean, that's really a mindset change. I walk around the office and it doesn't matter if it's the intern or the president. I'll pick somebody out from time to time and say, hey, is there anything I can do for you? You need a wheel greased? Use me as a tool and to help you get better at your life or your job or whatever your objectives are. And I think that might be the answer. Now, I'm going to ponder upon that, and I may have another answer that's better. But for right now, I think that certainly humbles me, you know, and it keeps perspective. You've got to have some sort of empathy and sympathy within you to really be effective at that technique. And yeah, I mean, I'm a confident person. You kind of have to be an entrepreneur and be successful, but not for the wrong reasons. If greed is your primary motivator, you're going to probably end up having an unfulfilled life.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
So yeah, so
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's a good answer, but that's all I got. That's all I got.
Look, I appreciate the time, Tom. And look, they are sort of the last one I did table for a more heavy hitting question because I think, and again, just drawing back on our first conversation from the podcast, is we get so tied up in what we're building, what's new right now, what's currently trending, and then staying grounded is kind of like a whole different conversation to that, but adjacent, but different. It's important to remember why you're doing this in the first place and what gratification are you seeking exactly? Because I think everyone sets out to help people to some degree when they start entrepreneurship or business. But what is the outcomes of that? And are you actually on that trajectory still once you start building and you start earning a bit of revenue? What does that really look like?
Well, that was a very insightful question. That was good. I'm sure you probably helped a lot of people thinking about that.
Hopefully. I'm hoping that that this podcast does reach someone who is in the mind or the mindset of entrepreneurship. They take some notes out of Tom's book. They take some notes out of my book, perhaps. But I think at the end of the day, the dust has settled, and we're sort of looking at the next phase of life, which is not being here anymore. That you can say that you were fulfilled within what you did and what you served, but also you not only got gratification, but you gave it back to someone, I think is important to remember.
Yep. Yep. I agree wholeheartedly.
Tom, thank you so much for joining us. We really look forward to publishing this episode. I think there's going to be a lot of people that do have their pen and paper out ready to go, as per instruction in the first 30 seconds of this podcast. But you came from such a wealth of knowledge, and you were the first founder that has come through with a heavy perspective on cybersecurity and the importance of it. Appreciate you making the time to talk with us today.
Well, it's absolutely been my pleasure.